If you follow me on Blue Sky, you've seen me pushing liberal currents. In an era where empty-headed fascists own essentially every significant media platform, it's never been more important that we cultivate our own institutions and publications, and the cultural fruit has never hung lower. The right wing has purchased all the megaphones at precisely the moment that it became clear they had nothing left to say. Liberal Currents is an online publication devoted to facing head-on the international crisis of rising authoritarianism. When I invited Associate Editor Samantha Hancox-Li to appear on this program, Liberal Currents was in the midst of a $500,000 fundraiser. I knew the library pizza bump probably wouldn't be sufficient to raise the remaining funds, but I did hope that one or two of you would take up the habit of reading the valuable work that they routinely publish. In the time since we recorded this conversation, an anonymous donor has given $277,000 to reach that final goal. I wish that I had gotten this out sooner so I could pretend to take credit. Still, you should give them a look. Samantha's work in particular brings a brilliant critical and historical perspective to current events and politics. Her work is, to my thinking, essential. She is also currently writing a book with the support of a Patreon. The book is titled Feminism as Transhumanism as Modernity, and you'll find the link in the show notes. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed in my side of this conversation, which I could have published sooner if I'd been able to face the shame of listening to myself commit what I'll call a doctor was the mother fallacy, and which I should note took place before the U.S. commenced war with Iran. On the day we recorded, I was clearly not at my sharpest. Regardless, Samantha was a great guest, and I appreciate her time. I'll see you on the other side of my very dignified theme music.
On the one hand, it's like Trump personally is just he loves the Trump show. And like as an entertainer, he understands that what pulls people in is like uncertainty, right? It's like every reality television show is like, who's going to get kicked off the network this week? And it's like he gets that. Like that's what pulls in ratings is when people don't know what's going to happen. And he loves that shit. And so, like, I feel like that's really driven kind of like some of this stuff that he does with foreign policy, where he's like, am I going to invade Iran? I don't know. Am I going to invade Greenland? You don't know. Right. And like, you can just tell it kind of gets clicks or whatever. But then, like, there's like the more geopolitical aspect of it, where like, yeah, it turns out that like high politics of international relations is just like two gamblers like facing off across the table. And like it is this weird little give and take and like finding the opportunities. So there's like these structural factors that push people towards like, are we going to invade Iran? And then there's like the personal factors and like we're moving all these planes and shit to the Middle East. So like, I don't know, who knows? Maybe he's going to announce during the middle of the State of the Union that he like kidnapped the Ayatollah or whatever.
Yeah. I feel like there was a phase in my kind of like coming online as a person who understood anything about politics at all when I was, like a teenager, basically in 25. I was basically a teenager until I was like 35, where it felt to me very comforting, I think, in retrospect, to imagine that there were like really determinative structural factors, right? I was kind of doing like really crude, basic, like leftism. Like if we just kind of look at the arc of history, we can calculate like what happened, what it caused, how we can, predict what's going to happen going forward from that. And like the last few years have really pounded into my head that contingency is so much more important than I want it to be. And like, I feel like that is such a determinative factor in everybody's mental health right now. Like
Yes.
the reason that the whole doomer thing is so appealing, where everybody is saying like, not everybody, where some sad people with real problems are saying like, clearly he's in charge. It's 1,000-year Reich. We're going to cancel the elections. It's going to be like this forever. it's because that is less stressful for them than the truth, which is that we don't know what's going to happen. And it could be really bad, but it could also be just different. And it probably will be different.
Doomerism is like, you're exactly right. People don't cling to doomerism because it's scary. They cling to it because it's comforting, right? If everything is already set in stone, nothing you can do actually will affect the outcome, and therefore you're not responsible for anything that you might do. And that is like profoundly comforting to people, even as it like terrifies them, even as it clearly like traps them in this like very awful psychological cycle. It is like a kind of a moral reassurance that nothing matters. And so I absolutely think that's why people turn to doomerism. But like on the other subject about like contingency, I've just finished reading volume 2 of Stephen Kotkin's 3-volume biography of Stalin. Absolutely incredible books. Strongly recommend everybody read them. Volume 3 hasn't been written yet, but volumes 1 and 2 are really good. And basically, he says that like his analytical framework is that there are genuinely structural factors in history, right? There are geopolitical structures that are driving things. These can be geographic, they can be demographic, they can be economic. That's happening. That is absolutely real. But personality is also real, and ideas are also real. That you can't understand anything really that happens in the Soviet Union or in Russia, Imperial Russia / the Soviet Union after 1917 without understanding both the power and the specifics of Marxist ideas and the personalities of the people involved, most importantly, Lenin and Stalin.
Yeah, I was refreshing myself on some of your writing before we had this conversation. I looked at the article that you published, I want to say like 10 days, 2 weeks ago, about the relationship of people who would like to be a resistance now to the idea of power, among other things. And you talked about, you mentioned that book in a couple of places, and my grasp on history generally is not what I would like it to be, but on that history it's not strong. But it was a really powerful reminder for me, because you talked in that article about the extreme contingency of that moment where Lenin and Stalin come back, and they come from essentially nothing to be in charge of so much, and to cause so much devastation. And I remember reading about that for the first time and feeling like I must be misunderstanding something. Like, how did this happen? I mean, it's like a more extreme case even of the thing that happens with Napoleon, where he comes back and you're like, how is he doing this? This is the stupidest, most great man of history brained bullshit. It should be impossible for this guy to come back and do what he did. But he did. And it is really destabilizing for me every time I encounter the evidence of the way that individuals can cause changes like that.
No, so like, I mean, obviously these books are about Stalin, but I think the discussion of Lenin is almost as interesting. And like what Lenin does for Marxism, what makes it, why people call themselves today Marxist-Leninists. Like what was his signal contribution? And there's important stuff he does, like theoretically about like trying to explain about how the struggle against capitalism, the struggle against imperialism, and the struggle against feudalism are actually totally, we promise, all the same struggle. That's not actually true in the long run, but like there's some theoretical work it does. But that's not even really why he matters, right? Lenin's genius is to take a system, Marxism, that is very deterministic, right? That is all structure all the time, right? Personalities don't matter. There's just class struggle. It's driving history. It's driving history in a way that is knowable in advance, right? We can see the arc of history bending before us, and communism is at the end of it. And Lenin, his genius is to be like, well, what if we just skipped a couple steps? Like, we know where we're going. Like, Yeah, I know the theory says we have to go through like bourgeois capitalism first, but what if we just didn't? And right, he emerges onto a scene that we can talk more about this, but is like unbelievably chaotic. It's hard, like we can like the Russian revolutions plural, and the Russian Civil War are unbelievably chaotic situations. And he just emerges onto these as, to put it kind of bluntly, a man of absolute will that he is willing to do anything to come to power, to bend anything, to sell out and destroy any friend, to give up on the fundamental predictions of Marxism in service of Marxism. And like, it all works. He wins, right? Like that's the key thing. It's like, yeah, like there were like a million dudes who thought they were men of will and they're just like all dead in the ditch. But like Lenin wins. And like this just bends the entire course of a century and like bends the course of an intellectual movement, right? It like completely changes how people think about Marxism and about communism, about socialism, about all these kind of leftwards movements in ways that are just transparently contingent and utterly dependent on the personalities of the people involved.
Right. So there's sort of this immediate contradiction and sense in which he's undermining his own the thing that is supposed to be the proof that this is the way that we're going. Everything he's doing is cutting in the opposite direction.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And this actually, like, this is one of these things you only like really like the Soviets don't like to talk about this. Is this incident with the left SRs, so the left social revolutionaries, led by this woman Maria Spiridonova, who had been like a terrorist who like exploded Tsarist officials and shit like that. She had like impeccable bona fides. She's leading the left SRs. They're one of the major parties in the like the very, very early Soviet Union. And she's a reader of Marx. And she's like, Lenin, what are you talking about? You came in on the slogan, peace, bread, land. And the peace part means make peace with Imperial Germany at any price. We have to get out of the war. And she looks at him and she's like, you're crazy. It's happening. The global revolution of the proletariat, it's happening right now. Just started here. In like 5 seconds, if we just keep the pressure on, it's gonna happen in Germany. So all we have to do is hang on and like incite proletarian revolution behind the lines, and Europe, the whole of Europe is about to go, right? So there's a real case she's making here. It's based on like impeccable Marxist principles. And she's like, Lenin, what are you doing? And she thinks, we're going to go around Lenin. We are just going to deliver a fait accompli. We are going to, this is amazing. We are going to break into the German ambassador's house in, I believe it's Petrograd at the time. They might have moved the capital of Moscow at this point, but I can't remember exactly. I think it's Moscow. They're going to break into the German ambassador's house and they're going to kill him. They're just going to assassinate an ambassador. And then they do it. She gets over her terrorist dudes and they just break into this guy's house and kill him. And she thinks this is going to restart the war with Germany, right? It's going to break up the Brest-Litovsk negotiations. Instantly, we'll be back at war. My policy will be running the show now. And so she does it. And the Bolsheviks, Lenin, it's not Lenin. This isn't Lenin's quote. Somebody else who's like there and like survives. He says something to the effect of, well, once we were waiting around for you to come arrest us. Because from the Bolshevik perspective, the left SRs were just doing a coup, right? They were just like, all right, well, we didn't like the policy of the state, so we're going to stop it through violence. That's a coup, right?
Right.
And then we're sitting around, and we thought you were going to come arrest us, and then you didn't. And we went and arrested you instead.
Is there a sense of fair play in that? Like, hey, if you were the last person to have done an assassination or this kind of violence, then you know what? You get to be in charge. We'll just go ahead and let this happen.
I don't think that's right exactly. I think that's the whole thing is that when I say Lenin is a man of absolute will, what I mean is he was willing to kill his friends in order to see his own policy through. Right? If Lenin had been in Spiridanova's position and he didn't like the policy of the state, he would have been like, yeah, I can go kill the German ambassador, or I can just go kill Spiridanova and then we'll just be at war with Germany now, right? He would have like, but she wasn't willing to do it, right? She was not willing to break the unity of the party, to break the unity of the Soviet Union in order to see her preferred policies through, whereas Lenin was, right? And like in retrospect, like all these communists like want to blame everything that happens on Stalin. He's like a convenient sin eater for all the horrors in a way. But like Lenin was a killer. Like the Red Terror starts under Lenin. He is absolute like he's the one who promotes Stalin, and he promotes Stalin because Stalin can apply pressure, and like that's it all gets started with him.
To zoom out a little bit or maybe back, I'm wondering how you decide to read this book in this moment. Like why was this the thing that felt like where you wanted to go next? And also like kind of generally I'm curious about how you're making these decisions, because with your work being what it is, it feels to me like there would be a kind of pressure that you would feel often in your reading. There's very limited time to do the kind of work that needs to be done. So I'm curious about how you think about that, how you think about the relationship between that to your reading for pleasure, and how you're making those decisions on a sort of a daily basis.
That's an interesting question. So, in terms of like this book in particular, Stephen Kotkin's book Stalin, volumes one, volume two, I listen to a lot of stuff. I listen to a lot of lectures, just when I'm doing errands or chores or other kinds of things. And like Kotkin has given a number of public lectures, and I listen to him and I'm like, this guy's pretty interesting. This guy has something to say. And he's not really, he's not really my favorite commentator on like present day affairs. But he seems to like really have an interesting, useful perspective. So that kind of pushes me in that direction. And like in terms of discoverability, like, yeah, it's like, okay, it's things I see on social media. It's stuff that people I respect talk about. Right. Or like sometimes stuff that gets like recommended to me by the algorithm, but like, yeah, it's mostly through these kinds of networks where it's like I'm talking about, oh, I'm reading this, I'm interested in that. People will recommend various things. But in terms of making a decision, like what do I actually read? There's a big picture answer here. And then there's a much more specific answer. So I read Abundance. It's on the shelf over there somewhere, by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. It's this book about like the most important thing facing politics today is not how to redistribute what we have, but how to produce more of what we don't have. Which I think, whatever, I think that's actually a pretty compelling message. You can argue about the details. But anyways, if you go to the appendix of that, or the bibliography of Abundance, you won't really find anything that wasn't written in the last 10 years about the last 10 years. It is a really, like, an unfortunately myopic perspective on the world. I thought like it's mostly like, you know, articles and like prestige magazines and like some blog posts and like the occasionally like popular book. And for me, I just think it's incredibly valuable to get out of the short-term perspective. And like I think a short-term perspective can totally warp your view on the world, and that it is a historical perspective is really the thing that I have been seeking since I first started writing about politics at all, is historical perspective to actually understand, why do things happen? Why has history taken this course? How did we get here? And then in terms of like what do I read specifically? It's like, well, you know, you can read the samples of a lot of stuff on, you know, Amazon these days, and like you'll figure out pretty quick. Usually you will figure out very quickly if something is worth reading or not. So for example, here's a book that I am not going to finish. Klaus Tuolite's Male Fantasies, Volume 1, Women, Floods, Bodies, History, which I'm very interested in. It's about the connection between fascism and gender and sexuality, something I'm very interested in. It is a really interesting primary, like an examination of primary source materials. It's about the Freikorps, which are these kind of paramilitary organizations in post-World War One Germany. They're essential in putting down, by which I mean like slaughtering, the Spartacist communist uprisings in post-World War One Germany. Many of the men involved go on to be Nazis and important Nazis. And like I read the sample on Amazon and I was like, okay, this seems like a really interesting, worthwhile book. And I'm not going to finish it because I got like 100 pages in and I'm just like, this guy is a Freudian. He is like a he's like an unreconstructed Freudian who's like, of course, this woman's missing left foot is a symbol for the penis. And as was proved in Freud's analysis of Osiris. And the whole book is like that. And it's just like, I don't really think I'm not going to get a lot out of this. The book is just drenched in this theory that I tend to think is bullshit. Right. So I kind of bring like my own, at the end of the day, my own beliefs, my own priorities, my own understanding of like, is this person bullshitting me or not? When I'm actually getting around to deciding whether to read something. I don't know if that really answers your question. It was kind of long-winded, so.
No, it does. I mean, there's a few interesting things there. I want to briefly join you in complaining about Freud. Freud is one of those people whose cultural dominance I really resent, and it's I mean, in fairness, I haven't spent a lot of time directly with him. I've just been exposed to so many analyses of him that I felt like, I kind of feel like I've been here and I want to do other things. What you said about wanting the broader view, wanting to bring history into your writing and your thinking on politics, that really spoke to me. Something that is so funny to me about the way that discourse works and about how narrow our view of history is in discussions of politics is like I always think about Jamel Bouie's superpower is that he is willing to have to talk about history, to read it and discuss it. And there's more than that. Like he's also, I really like his writing. I agree with him about most things generally, and I trust his judgment a lot. But it is because he is consistently showing the work of having done the reading in history and bringing that context into this moment because when people are talking about the US in particular, it almost feels like there's a desire. I mean, there's definitely a desire, and there are obvious reasons for the desire to not interact with history, right? To not think about our own existence for the past couple hundred years, but to instead kind of continually decide like whatever's happening right now is the most important thing and it's what it's going to be like going forward, right? And I have found it so helpful every time I found a writer like yourself, like Jamel, like other folks who is willing to tell me about history. Because I mean, I don't have the time to read as much history as I should. The way that I usually end up choosing to read history is I will be really enjoying a book in translation. I'll really be enjoying a particular director. I'm near the end now. I've been near the end for a while because it has become such a miserable slog of a series of three histories on Mao, whose
Oh,
whose
that's
author
interesting.
I'm blanking on, but it's the one I think. I think the series is called like a People's History of China or something like that. But that is often how it happens for me that I end up getting into history is I want to understand better a piece of art that I've been enjoying, right? There's like so what happened there, and I've talked about this on the show before, but the director Jia Zhangke, whose work is on Criterion right now. His work is so I love it so much, but it is so based in a really specific moment and a really particular sense of Chinese history. And so watching it, it felt like they're already art films, but they felt like, art films cubed because I didn't understand anything. All of the things I was supposed to understand, I didn't understand, in addition to the things that were meant to be ambiguous. And I've been so desperate to understand them a little bit better. So that's usually how it happens for me. But I don't have time to read as much of that as I wish I did because I don't have a professional responsibility to do so. So when I get to read folks who do have that time and who take that responsibility seriously, that's that's huge for me. That's something I really benefit from.
Yeah, it's interesting that you would say that this is you get into history from watching films and being confused by them. And for me, like the reason that I'm on this show at all, that I do all the stuff I do, is an experience of being extremely confused. In November 2016, um, that was a very, very bad night for me. Um, and I woke up and I was extremely hungover. But I also felt this kind of wrenching dislocation,
Yeah.
that didn't go away. That yeah, over the next several days and weeks, I had this realization that I had no idea how this had happened. I had no idea how we had gotten here. That in a very deep way, I realized I understood the facts of history. I knew what had happened in what order, more or less, right? The broad strokes of history, I knew it. But if you asked me, why did this happen and not that? Why did that happen and not this? How did we elect this man? Right? What possible confluence of factors led us to elect this man? I had no idea. I could not answer that question to my own satisfaction. And that really drove me, and has driven me, I guess it's 10 years now almost, just shy of a decade, into trying to understand these questions about history, about how political change happens, about as I came to believe about how political economy is a very useful theory for understanding these things. And so yeah, I mean it's a similar experience, just not art films, just one really bad night.
Yeah, that was I don't know. It's always so hard to go back to that. I have such specific memories of it where like my partner and I stayed up until like midnight together and we had been confident as many people had that we knew where it was going to go. We were elated in the time leading up to it because we're like finally we're going to get this stupid motherfucker out of our lives and we won't have to hear what he thinks anymore and he'll just go die, right? Like I'll never think about him again until he's gone. And like I mean on the subject of contingency it was so close to being true, right? Like that really we could have done it and like God help us, just imagine. But I remember like they went to bed and I stayed up because we didn't know yet. We didn't know and I was refusing. I was like if I keep watching this, maybe I'll see the moment where things turn around and I was so desperate to see that. And I remember the feeling of just like it felt to me like poison dripping in like little bits over and over and over again just kind of like by the end of it I was numb and then yeah I woke up very hungover. That was the other end of that was we spent the next day. I think we were playing Final Fantasy 14 or 15, whichever one is the one that has like this endless series of scenes in a train at the end that they had to like redo because everybody hated it so much. But we weren't having a great time with it, but that was what we've been playing. So it was like that's what this day is. We're just going to sit here and try to recover from what just happened a little bit and we're going to play this video game we're not enjoying.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
not a
then
great
yeah,
night.
no, and there's like there's I this is the reason that you try not to go back to it too much, right? But I mean like it it is genuinely like the first thing that I talked about when I started the show and I was introducing it, I was explaining like what I wanted to do. The texture of reality and of our lives has changed in a way over the past 10 years that I don't think people really appreciate. Like, I feel like people have forgotten what it was like before. And like and I wish that they would remember because like we can't have all of it back and like you don't want all of it back, but there are a couple things I would like to have back, like not thinking about one awful person constantly. Like that's the thing that I feel like makes it takes up like 30% of the brain space that should be spent on reading, just thinking about this guy I hate. And I want the reading part back.
The sun keeps on shining, but it's slightly colder somehow.
Yeah.
That's been my experience of it. There's a movie, maybe you'll be surprised, Killing Them Softly. It's a gangster movie set in like the immediate aftermath of like the great financial crisis. And there's a speech that our mob hitman makes at the end of the movie that in many ways I found really inspiring since 2025, where the mob hitman says, you know, he's saying America's a community. Don't make me laugh. America's not a country. It's just a business. In America, you're on your own. And in the context of the movie, I was really struck by this because this is presented as a very cynical take, but in many ways it's aspirational. Because this guy, the mob hitman, he's like the one guy out here who's not really asking anybody for anything, but he gets his job done, right? He's actually good at what he does, and he's not whining all the goddamn time. The way that like many of these other mob guys in the movie are just whining all the goddamn time. Um, and to me, that was a very important thing to keep in mind in this time that we live in that like yeah you can have hopes and you can have dreams and you can want to fight for a better America, but you got to take care of yourself. You got to like have a very serious sense of like, is this threatening to me personally in a physical way right now?
Yeah.
And if it's not, then like I can care about it, but I can't let it eat me, right? I
Yeah.
can't let it eat my soul because it's not doing anybody any good, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not helping me, it's not changing the world, it's not doing a goddamn thing, right? So just take care of yourself, understand what your interests really are, and then settle on what you want to change in the world and then work for that, but don't get all tied up about it.
Yeah, well, and like I feel like a person hearing you say that might imagine that like I think that a person could uncharitably imagine that as sort of a Pollyanna-ish way of living in the world. And there's a lot of reasons that I don't think that's the case. But I specifically that same article I mentioned before, in it you wrote, and this is something that I think about a lot and like find a lot of peace in accepting. You wrote about the examples of the people that were shot in Minnesota and how like yes, some people are going to die. Some people have died in trying to do something to turn stuff around, and some more people are going to. And I think part of your argument in that context was a lot more would die if we then decided we're going to go like, you know, storm the Capitol or, you know, take up guns or whatever. So that's not a solution to that problem. But the idea that we are hiding from the fact that there will be that people are going to pay that price. You're not hiding from that, and I appreciate that. It has been really important for me to think as we are in this second time around, like what are the times where I would be okay to just go out and say like, okay, you know what, if they shoot me today, they shoot me today, right? Like when are the moments where that's a risk I want to take, and what are the moments that I don't? Because people talk about it as if you can decide to just opt out of that entirely, and maybe that's the rational thing to do. And I don't think that's true. I think that to an extent, you know, and it's easy for me to say that by comparison to a lot of folks, right? Because generally my risk profile is people are less likely to shoot me, right? For a variety of
I mean,
weird
they shot
reasons.
Alex Pretty.
Yeah.
They shot Renee Good. They
Yeah.
shot her right in the face.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the risk profile is different, but it doesn't make you immune.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, like one thing I think is a really valuable interview and like good on him for just being so brutally honest was this interview that Ezra Klein did with Ta-Nehisi Coates right after Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And you can see Klein has this anguish in him. He is anguished at the times that he lives in, right? He's like, how could we lose? I don't want to live in this world. I want to live in a peaceful time. And Coates just says, look, sometimes you lose, right?
Yeah.
That's the long game is there's another team playing the other side and sometimes they win. And that's to me like I understand the desire to go back, like to just go back to the 90s. We're just gonna close the book on this. The fever will break. It'll all be like when you were eating a pizza and drinking a 2 liter and playing GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Um, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Right. And like again, this is to me what I think Coates is gesturing at, what I believe in very strongly, is like having this historical perspective, right? Or like whatever. I met a guy at a bar very shortly after the inauguration, and he was flying. He was drunk as hell. But he was so mad. He was like, "Why haven't we dragged this guy out of the White House?" This is like January 21st. And I'm like, well, because he won the election. Like,
Yeah.
when was the best time to stop any of this from happening? Last November. And
Yeah.
we didn't,
No.
right? We are going to be living with the consequences of that. There is no undo button, there's no magic switch that's going to get us out of the situation that we are in. We are in a fight. It's a long fight. Like, it is just a long struggle, and you have to prepare yourself mentally for a long struggle.
Yeah. And then we get to find out, assuming that we make some positive progress over the next couple of years, we get to find out what the problem is after that. Because I really feel like I have no idea what the shape of the problem is going to be. I feel reasonably confident that we will have some positive things happen in the most general sense. I even have some opinions about what shape they're going to take, but I do not know what the response is going to be. And I feel like that is like the number one analytical failure of people who like post a lot to Blue Sky or things like that. Like they forget that like the other side gets a vote. Like you said, there are people on the other side of this who made decisions to make this happen and put us where we are. So they're going to have another vote. They're going to get to try something else. And you know, I try to be optimistic about it because prediction is a mug's game anyway. But yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing. Like I feel like that feeling that we had in 2016 and again in 24, for me, it was like part of what was so poisonous about it was that it felt like validation of all my like worst mental health problems, right? It was like all of your like most neurotic projection of the future where you always imagine the worst thing happening is real and you were right. And like it's so important to resist that impulse.
I think that's right. I think this is kind of exacerbated by social media, where, especially if you're a big enough account, like you can post doomy shit all day, and your followers will lap it up and they'll tell you how right you are, and they'll feed you more doomy shit back
Yeah.
at you, right? It is like a mirror that projects your worst anxieties and your worst depressions back at you as if it were reality. And I think that's an extremely dangerous feedback loop to get caught in. I think it will like cook your brain like a microwave, to put it mildly.
Yeah, no, it's broken people that we all know like that. I feel like everybody should be able to name a person. If you can't name a person, look to your left, look to your right. It might be you, but I want to reorient a little bit and think about some of the good things that that are making life worth living, which I tend to think it is. And so I'm wondering about reading for pleasure. And there's one book in specific that I was curious about, or I guess a series of books that you posted about a few months ago. I was not sure if I remember correctly that this was you, but I looked and I saw like, okay, yeah, it was it. The post was Read Theory, and then it was a link to Elizabeth Moon's The Deed of
Yes.
Paxenarion. I don't know if that's, I mean, it's a fantasy word. I suppose I can pronounce it any way I want. But I have been trying to get into reading some of the like genres that I enjoyed more when I was younger, and I could forgive some of the difficulties with prose that you often see in my favorite, fantasy and science fiction. And I've been trying to get over that snootiness about the prose and dive back in with middling success. And I thought that one looked fun. And I just wanted to hear like what is your relationship to that book or that series? What are your thoughts and feelings about Elizabeth Moon?
Oh, a lot. That is one of the formative books of my childhood. The Deed of Paxtonarian trilogy of books starts with Sheep Farmer's Daughter, but I can actually I don't know what the other names are because I just got the trilogy book and someone gave it to me and was like I think that'll be your kind of book, and they were right, man. They had me dialed in. Sheep Farmer's Daughter picks up with Paxtonarian Dorothen's daughter, who is a sheep farmer's daughter in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. And her father is telling her, you are going to get married to that boy next door. And whether you like it or not. And she says, you know what, Dad, fuck you. And he takes off his belt and says, no, but seriously. And she picks up like an old rusty sword that hangs over the fireplace. And she says, no, but seriously. She leaves her house and she leaves the sword. She sticks the sword like at the edge of the property line because she doesn't want to be a thief. Right? She's like, they can say anything about me, but I'm not a thief. And then she like spends like a day or two hiking without like, with no food or water, whatever, maybe some food or water, whatever it is. But she spends like the next several days like hard travel to a place where she knows that there's a mercenary company that's recruiting because she knows like this is a ticket out of this place. And that like then she's off. She's on the roller coaster. She's in a mercenary company. Um, and one of the things that I think that really hit me in that first book, especially, is that there are times when the difference between right and wrong is very stark. It's not actually complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doing the right thing is very simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy. It can actually be quite hard, and you just cleave to what is right regardless. Um, and what's interesting to me is that as the series progresses, that the clarity remains, but the world gets more complicated. That choice between right and wrong and the people who hold themselves up as the avatars of righteousness, like, I don't know, maybe they're not always quite as correct as they think they are. Maybe the world's a more complicated place. So there's obviously this aspect of it that really attracted me to it was just the power and the importance of doing well in a difficult world. And then, obviously also on a gender level, a book that was very important to me because it's not a book about romance. It's not a book about how you find your fulfillment in a man and like that's the most important thing in your life. It's, what's the most important thing in your life is what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a book about how women are weak. It's about how women can do or be anything. And that was something that was very valuable to me as well.
Yeah. I talked last week about Tamara Pierce, and I'm often surprised by the how often if I bring her up, people are like, "Oh yeah, Lioness Rampant series." Like that was a big one for me as a kid, and that was really because my mom read it, and it was in the house, and so I read it too.
I mean, so Tamora Pierce, it comes up every single time that I mention Elizabeth Moon. People are like, by the way, what do you think about Tamora Pierce?
I wondered.
The answer is I didn't read her.
Yeah,
Somehow, like just the contingencies of what I was reading and what I like with the whatever bookstore or library I went to, I just never read any Tamora Pierce.
yeah,
Um, I've read a lot of Elizabeth Moon. I've read, I believe, all of the Harris Serrano books. I don't know if I've read the latest Vada's War book, but I've read a lot of Vada's War. Um, I've read some of her other stuff. Was like The Speed of Dark. Um, I read a lot of Elizabeth Moon, is what I'm trying to
yeah,
say. Uh, I read Honor Harrington, but only when I was in college. Again, because I mentioned Elizabeth Moon, and someone's like, "You should read Honor Harrington."
yeah,
And so I've read a lot of Honor Harrington. That as listeners may know, kind of degenerates into a shambles in certain ways. But some other stuff.
yeah. What is the what is the sort of long-term relationship with those books like? That is one of those things that I am like actually kind of coming back and trying to cultivate now as a reader, because I feel like I was homeschooled up until I went to college. I did not have anything assigned to me to read for any reason, and so I went in there both like I really loved reading, I loved books, but my blind spots were gigantic, and so there was a period of just like, okay, now I'm catching up with like some of the like basic stuff that you're supposed to read, because up until this point the closest I got to something canonical was like Diana Wynne Jones, which I love, but is not usually what people think of as the core reading that you need to do in high school. And so then I've been kind of coming back and catching up on some of the stuff that I put away as I got to know your Kurt Vonnegut's and Tim O'Brien's and whatever. And so like recently, for example, I have been reading CJ Cherry's Foreigner series. I was wondering if you knew that. Yeah. So I suspected that might be one that you're into. Have you read a lot of those? I'm in the third one right now.
I've read exactly one book by CJ Chera, and that is, sorry, she's an amazing story. Do you know why her name is CJ Chera? It's because
Yeah,
her
yeah.
actual name is Carol Cherry. That is
Yes.
her just a real given name. And people were like, yeah, people are going to think you're a romance novelist. They're never going to take you seriously. And so she just went by her initials and added an H to her name. And
Yeah.
like now she's like this legendary science fiction author. I have read Down Below Station. That's the only book of hers that I've read. I haven't read the other stuff. Down Below Station stuck with me, but mostly because Captain Signe Mallory stuck with me.
What's his deal?
Her
Or her
deal.
deal?
Yeah, what's the deal with Captain Signe Mallory? There's a great song, you can find it on YouTube, about Captain Signe Mallory that will express the vibe. She is one of the 12, I want to say 12 captains of Earth Fleet, which are like they're kind of like aircraft carriers that are like out on the far end of like Earth space fighting off I believe it's the League, or maybe it's the Confederation. I don't know. Some opponent of Earth, some colony. And they're like they've almost kind of gone and become warlords rather than captains because they're so strung out at the far end of space. And things are just kind of going to shit everywhere because there is a war on and there are refugees and Earth doesn't care. And like the rot is kind of starting to infect Earth Fleet in a lot of ways. And Mallory is not exactly a good woman. She is absolutely a very hard woman who's willing to be quite unpleasant, willing to be quite cruel, actually, from time to time. But as the book goes on, she also has her principles in a way that just distinguishes her from like the increasing like piracy and warlordism of her fellow captains. That bedrock kind of sees her through the dark in a way that everybody else doesn't have.
It struck me that in your description of that book and of the Elizabeth Moon books as well, you're immediately going to like a particular character that was like really important to your experience of the book. And that's one of those like interesting differences in people's reading that I'm always interested to see. You have folks who will, if you ask them about the thing that they're reading, enjoying right now, they'll tell you about the really interesting premise, or they'll tell you about the world, or they will tell you like you were saying about like a particular person or figure, like character relationship that really speaks to them. And I'm interested in that because I feel like it almost never occurs to me to describe things in that way, right? I feel like usually when what do I go to when I want to explain what I'm enjoying about a book? I think maybe usually I'm like trying to talk about the structure of it or something, right? Like how it kind of sets things up and what it tells you to want in the beginning, and then how it kind of delivers on that. I guess because it's probably a fiction writing thing, although you write fiction too. I
I'm not
remember.
very good at it, but I've tried it.
but yeah, that's one of those like fundamental differences between different readers. I think like another thing that I often look on with a kind of bafflement, honestly, is the idea of escapism, right? Like often there is the particularly when people enjoy like science fiction and fantasy stuff that has a lot of world building, like they'll get really excited about the fact that like when they're reading, they're transported to this other place and they get to be there for a while. And whenever I hear that, I'm like kind of jealous because I'm like, you do? Like I
So
always
the,
feel like I'm looking right at a page. Like that I never stop looking at that page in my experience of it. I never get to that imaginary space.
So this is interesting to me. As you note, there was a time when I really wanted to be a fiction author, and that was something I spent a lot more time on. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was that I needed to stop reading like a reader and I needed to start reading like a writer. That as a reader, you read the words, they have an effect on you, you like the effect, and that's it. As a writer, you read the words, they have an effect on you, and then you need to also ask, how has the author produced this effect in me? And that can be, as you note, that can be a really interesting question, and people can really love it. And for me, it was always kind of like a practice to like ask yourself that question. I had to like force myself to do it. And so for me, these days, as ever, when I go to fiction, I go to it for that escapism. I go to it to be that other character for a while to feel a different feeling. I've always felt things extremely strongly in fiction. But I find world building, I tend to find world building much less interesting. I'm going to talk some shit right here. One of these authors these days, very big, very famous, people love him for it, for his world building, is Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah.
And there's a real craft there, right? That he, obviously, he's good at it in important ways, but like, I was always looking at this stuff and I'm like, yeah, but like the new physics of this book is like the thinnest thing in the world, right? Like a halfway educated Victorian gentleman could have cracked this shit in like, you know, his attic laboratory. And the only reason no one can do it in your world is like there's this giant conspiracy to prevent anybody from knowing anything. And like this has kind of been my takeaway from reading science, from reading history, that if I want to like understand a world that is strange and different and incomprehensible, I read books about our world because
Yeah.
our world is strange and different and incomprehensible. And it's so complicated and it's so interesting. And that's part of why I'm obsessed with history. Right? That I don't need to go to another world for its world building. Right. There are
Yeah.
things that I go to other worlds for, but like world building isn't really one of them.
Yeah. It's so to briefly talk shit as well, but with affection and respect. I am teaching a world building class now for the second time for people who are like between the ages of like 13, 16, and Sanderson comes up a lot. And I always feel guilty that I have not been able to get into his work and find what the people that enjoy it are finding, because it's clearly it's there. Clearly there's a lot to enjoy. But honestly, I've never made it past the first scene of the book that I've tried multiple times. And just like the way that it like really wanted to linger in the setting and like was describing what this one, I think it's like literally a guy is sitting in a bar is the opening scene or something like that. And there's all sorts of ruminations that don't add up to anything in particular. And every time I've tried it, I'm probably just getting like a page and a half in, but I've given up every time. And I feel like with my students, even though it is a world building class and that is what they've been pitched on and that's what they applied to participate in, I am often encouraging them to do kind of anything other than world building and trust that the world is going to be there, right? Like that if you want to build a world that is interesting to readers, you would actually usually be better served just building a relationship between two or three people. And the world is going to become visible through your experience of those people, because that's the thing that is actually interesting anyway, except for the problem that there is a very real division between, like, actually, there are a lot of readers who absolutely want the world building. Like, they
Well,
totally
I
want that.
so I'll contradict myself a little bit here, where I think to me the opposite problem you can see in J.K. Rowling, where Rowling has a plot and she has characters and she has relationships. And the world that emerges is literally whatever she needs in the next 5 seconds
Yeah.
to like make that plot happen. Um, right. Do I need to pull something out of my ass right now? Ta-da, here it is. Right. And like I find that tremendously frustrating, in part because I find it boring. Because like I find like one of the things that's interesting to me is the way that the world constrains us, right? The way that the world is unexpected, right? Like, to take this example of Stalin, the fact that Lenin just dies of a stroke, like, out of nowhere, that is like no author would ever let that happen because that's crazy. You
Yeah,
can't
that's
let
a big
him
waste.
die. He's like such an important character. He hasn't made any preparations, and then it's just like, whoops, like you're toast, boyo, and like everything goes by the wayside, in important ways, in like the organization of the Bolshevik Party. Um, and I find like what's like what saves Stalin's ass on collectivization? It's like, oh yeah, congratulations, the Great Depression just happened. And like this is totally messed up world wheat markets in a way that like will save the fiscal solvency of your state, right? And so it's the way that like the world constrains people and acts in ways that are totally unpredictable and unexpected that I find really interesting. And so like I kind of like it when a world is built well enough that'll like kick the characters in the ass in a way that like escapes from the logic of character dynamics. Because I tend to find like, you know, I think sometimes people can be a little bit boring with their character dynamics.
Yeah, the idea of reading fiction to sort of simulate the experience of socializing with other people is like simultaneously, of course, that's what it is. Like to some extent, that's what art is for generally, is to socialize with other people in indirect ways and also to simulate the direct experience. Like I remember being a kid when I had a very different experience of reading and casting the books I was reading. I would put my friends in the book and I'd be like, okay, this girl here, this is going to be this friend of mine, and I'm going to imagine her in the scenes. And it was just because I wanted to hang out with my friends. It was because I wasn't seeing them that much. But that is not really what I'm going to it for now, and it is a strange thing to think back on. I think basically I'm saying like, yeah, it is important to feel that pressure from other things because people are available generally now in a way that they weren't when I was 12, right? And it was like, well, if your friends aren't around, you have no way of contacting them.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's not how I've ever related to books. I've never cast other people as characters in books. Maybe this is just like a trans thing, but like for me, books were always a way of not being myself, like getting out of my own head, which was not always a happy place.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I meant to circle back to that because I feel like that is another one of those like fundamental differences. Like I I think that is one of the big, like, if we were to make one of those ideological, four corners charts, you'd have your escapism, your world building in a couple of those corners maybe, and then another one would be, are you in the book? And that is, again, that is like not something that I've experienced for a long time. And it's a funny thing because like so much of the culture is pitched directly at me in a way that like I almost feel resentful of, right? Like the number of main characters of stories who are like myself, brown-haired white guys named Michael. It's like
Oh,
it's
you're
a
right
huge
though.
number. It's infuriating. So like I don't put myself in the books that I'm reading at this point, and generally speaking, if I feel invited in, I fight it. I'm like, please don't bring me in there. I want to read about anybody other than me. But of course, that is like that is a like a main purpose of reading fiction, right? Is to be able to imagine like what would it be like if I weren't here, if I were somebody else, and if I were having a totally different experience.
I mean, that's Le Guin's line, right? To see ourselves in other times and other weathers.
Do you have a favorite Le Guin?
The Matter of Segri. one of the rare cases where I'm actually like, yes, world building. I'm sorry, I'm permitted to contradict myself,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to fiction, anyways. Nonfiction, maybe not so much, but fiction certainly. The Matter of Segri is one of her short stories. It's from the shortish stories, from the Hainish cycle, so it's like nominally set in the same universe, but that kind of doesn't matter. And it constitutes a set of contact reports by Hainish explorers, visitors to a planet, Segri, that has over a period of centuries. And Segri has one very fundamental difference. Like the ancient Hainish made this place slightly different, just like they made winter in the left hand of darkness slightly different. The sex ratio at birth is something like 20 women to one man. And it is a long form exploration of both what would that society actually be like and how would a deeply misogynistic alien society perceive it as they arrived there and explored that place. And it's terrific.
It is interesting to me reading the Foreigner series now how much I feel like another one of those like axes of how science fiction works in particular, like things that your placement on this spectrum in a book determines a lot about how it works, but it's not something that people necessarily talk about explicitly because it's often an invisible decision. The series, the Foreigner series, is about humans accidentally, basically they mess up their faster than light travel. They end up based on a planet that is already inhabited by a sort of human-ish species that is like the whole point of the books is to flesh out the experience of interacting with aliens, of interacting with people that aren't like you, who aren't even people. And it's really dedicated to that, but they're absolutely all men and women. The gender situation is the most scrutable it possibly could be. The main character is he has not yet slept with her, but I imagine he's going to. He gets propositioned by a one of the lady aliens in the second book, I think. And I assume we're going to end up there at some point. And it is like distracting. It is really strange to me how much it's like everything else is kind of up for grabs and who knows. But I'll tell you this, the aliens, they're men and they're women. And they are largely heterosexual. There's maybe a hint that maybe somebody somewhere in this world isn't, but we don't get to see them. And it feels like there's a budget that's being spent down, right, when you are varying from the expectations of your readers. And there are some books that decide, you know what, we don't have anywhere near the budget that we need left over from all this other stuff that we're doing to spend any time thinking about gender at all. And like, I feel like it's gotten to a point now where that would not be tenable. I'm sure that if she were writing this series now, there would have to be it would have to be at least addressed. And maybe it is later. I'm in the third book of like 40, so maybe the day will come. But it is a strange thing that I feel like that constraint is more determinative of how stories are structured than like nearly anything else. There's so much other stuff that you can change, and that one thing is like, no, we're gonna go ahead and keep that gender binary. It's gonna work the way that we're used to, because like we don't even know what we do without it. We don't know how to think without it.
That's absolutely correct. You got it. Like for my part, like I haven't I haven't read any of the Foreigner series. I've read some of the culture novels by Ian Banks, much beloved by certain people. And like, I mean, I read several of them. They're good. But like they are fundamentally structured by heterosexuality and not just like heterosexualism, in a kind of a deep way. And like, what's interesting is because like nominally the world building is like the culture is like this totally gender fluid society where you can just change your sex by thinking about it and your body will like remorph itself over a couple of days and like boom, done, easy peasy. Um, but the author is just like not interested in that. He's interested in heterosexuality and in a world structured in profound ways by heterosexuality, by like women who are like beautiful and promiscuous and unattainable, and men who are like do hard deeds in dark places. And like, I just can't with that. Like
Yeah.
that to me, that's like what my most fundamental line in fiction is like, I'm sorry to you listeners, but like I'm just not interested in men and I'm not interested in heterosexuality. Like they're great. They exist in the world. But like when I go to fiction, I am not interested in either of those things.
Yeah. Well, that I mean, there's plenty.
Sorry.
No, no,
Like
there's absolutely there's enough interest. I'm not worried. God knows. People read about men. I didn't get too far with those books. I read like part of one and I got frustrated for other reasons before I even had time to get frustrated for that reason.
which book?
Um I don't know. Whatever the first one is in that series, is there a canonical first one in the culture
I
book?
always thought it was Consider Phoebus, but I might be wrong.
That is the one. I believe that
Okay,
is the one.
yeah, all right.
And yeah, I didn't get far enough to get frustrated by that. I was kind of bored, honestly. It's like I don't totally understand what I'm supposed to be excited about here or what's so interesting or challenging about it. But I'm sure I would have found my way to getting frustrated about that eventually. It is really, I mean, I don't even know what to say about it. It structures story so heavily that it is genuinely difficult for people, myself included, to imagine what else you would do, right? If you didn't have that to sort of tie things up, right? There's the history of genre where, one of the main genres you can have is, does it end with a man and a woman getting married, right? Like that is the defining question of so much fiction for so long. And I really enjoy reading about romance in the sense of characters getting really interested in each other and being really focused on each other, being really involved in each other. But it does get a little bit tiring to have them focused on each other in the same way, sort of rehearsing the same thing with variations like that, right? But it's genuinely hard to, again, there's that budget, right? Like if we're going to figure out something to do instead of that, we have to spend less time on the rest of the world, it feels like. I think about like John Varley. Have you read John Varley? Is fun. John Varley looks trashy and is in some
I
ways,
mean, I love trash, so don't even no
but it's
preface needed.
his science fiction is at least the books that I've read, the Ophiuchi Hotline and Steel Beach are both set in worlds where, like you're saying, like it's not quite you can change your gender with a thought, but it is, if you decide, you know what, I'd like to spend the next few years as a woman, you go, you get your surgery, you do it. Everybody says like, all right, and then if you want to switch back at some point, you switch back, and that ends up being like it takes so much time for the books to accommodate that basic idea that like once it enters, it takes over in each case. And it's like, and like, I mean, rightly so on some level, because like it does feel, these books are from, let's see, OFG Hotline is 1977, Steel Beach is 1992. I'm sure that the readers appreciated getting to spend some time with those ideas, but it is like, yeah, it takes up the whole budget. It takes up the energy that the book has for exploring challenging or exciting things in a lot of ways. But I mean, it's still fun to read. I enjoy that about it, but I sometimes wish, like, I wish I could read more fiction where the stuff that is challenging is treated as, well, we're just gonna price that in. We're just gonna deal with that challenge. If it's hard, then it's hard, and we're gonna do that. We're gonna do other stuff too.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I think to me, I would bring this back to something like that I've come to believe that in many ways, like patriarchy is like the it's like the ancient enemy. The most ancient enemy is patriarchy, and it is like a foundation stone of all other forms of oppression in a very deep way. In ways that I like, and people these days are like, oh, patriarchy, like that was invented by John Capitalism in 1776. And then like
Right.
those horrible colonialists like brought it here and there. And like Talia Butt has her book Brown Trans Les collection of essays is out like right now. And she's like, bullshit. Like, come on. Like, it wasn't English missionaries who, like, created Chinese foot binding in the 10th century, right? It wasn't, like, Christianity that, like, imposed at the point of a gun that made, like, the Book of Manu tell, women to submit to their husbands. Um, like, and if you, like, actually look honestly at the historical record, patriarchy is goddamn everywhere. It is
Yeah.
like it is older than history. It
Yeah.
is older than history in a profound way. Um, and it is tied up in important, like, I think it's like actually not actually separable from like something like race, something like an out group
Mm.
that is defined in a kind of pseudo biological way. Um, that this kind of like biopolitical vision of humanity is like older than our oldest memories of ourselves. And so it's not really surprising that it would like structure fiction and it would structure our stories and it would structure our emotions. It's just like it's also bad. Uh,
Yeah.
sorry, heteros. Um, but like, yeah, like whatever. I'm a little drunk and I'm a little silly. But like, it is on some level something that we need to figure out how to overcome,
Yeah.
or like to not be consumed by in quite the same way.
Yeah. Well, and like you felt like honestly, I felt less articulate than usual for like the last 30 minutes or something as I've like tried
Sorry,
to
I did
no,
it.
no.
It was my
Is
fault.
no, no, it's absolutely me. It's like it is the challenge of talking about exactly the thing that you're talking about, right? Like in trying to think critically about the way that patriarchy does structure story, right? It is so hard to think about what else could happen. And to kind of like circle back to where we started in some ways, like this feels to me like a place where determinism is really not comforting. And it is really nice to think that things did happen like this recently, right? There's this desire to say that patriarchy is a relatively new invention. I think partly because we really want to feel like the state of nature is politically what we would like it to be, right? We want to feel like if nobody had come along and taught us to do evil in whatever way, if capitalism hadn't come along and structured the world, then we would naturally not do sexism. We would not do patriarchy. It would be our natural biological, psychological tendency to treat each other as equals. And like, I don't know, maybe if you go back far enough, obviously I have no idea, but like that's sure not what it looks like, right? Like the history does not suggest that the natural state of people is to treat each other kindly, generously, and to not look for opportunities to exploit. And I think that has been a thing that has been hard for me to let go of is the fantasy of the moment where exploitation was invented, right? Like that is a thing that is really nice to think about that I no longer believe in at all.
Uh, yes. So there's while we're talking about books, there's a book that has been incredibly influential for me. Could probably grab it off the shelf. How the World Became Rich by Mark Kayamba and Jared Rubin. And it's an economic history. It's an economic history of the world. And it's really great, in a lot of ways because it's like a very fair-handed survey of economic history and theories of economic history. Like they have their own theory, but they're like, there's also like eight other theories, and we're going to present all of them, and we are going to tell you what they thought, and we're going to tell you their evidence, and they're like genuinely, they're not like loading the deck against their ideological opponents. They hear these people out and they present the best possible case for them. Um, so it's a really great book. It's very important. It's like one of these things that like just genuinely revelatory for me. But the important thing is that like holy shit, like there is a great break in human history and it happens like 200 years ago. Like not even 250, like 200 years ago that for almost the entirety of human history, all 30 or 60,000 years of it, per long run, per capita, economic growth is approximately zero. right? The productive forces do not improve, like, or at least not on a scale that is appreciable to humans, um, or at least not in a way that is sustained. Uh, right, occasionally you'll have like a tiny little uptick because like the climate became more favorable to your particular form of wheat or whatever. But like mostly it doesn't. Mostly you're just set. And then there is this radical something that happens again, quite literally about 200 years ago, give or take. And it happens at a specific place. We can nail it down. And it's like, it's basically England and like the Netherlands, and mostly England, where this takes off. And then something spreads out from this epicenter, right? It spreads out to the north of France. It spreads out to the north of England. It spreads out to North America. It spreads out to the rest of Europe. It begins to spread out all over the world from this moment of inception. Um, and in many ways, to me, the creation of long run per capita economic growth, which is another way of saying technological progress, is like the fundamental turning point of history. And it like enables all the stuff that we want from the world. It enables people it enables the mass of people to live comfortable lives. It enables feminism. It enables democracy. It enables everything that we're fighting for. And so to me, like you're right that there is a very powerful story. There is a powerful old story form about the natural. There is a natural state. It's been disturbed. Now things are bad. We need to go back. That is a powerful story. It is ancient. And that's not the story I want to tell, right? The story I'm going to tell is that, like, we were born in filth. Like, we were born evil, actually. Like, most of human history is a history of evil. History is a river of blood. And it is like the great miracle of the modern world is we are somehow picking ourselves up out of the filth and becoming better than we were. Like discovering what we always ought to have been. Like there's like this weird like Gnostic interpretation of it you can kind of do if you want to, but like let's just skip that for the moment, right? And like to me, that's the story that I want to be telling, not about how we need to go back to some golden age, but about how we can create something that has never existed but always should have. It's what I work on, like outside of liberal currents. Like I'm writing a book actually called "Feminism as Transhumanism is Modernity," and that's the book right there.
Yeah, yeah. I've read like the first chapter. I am not at all caught up. Well, not the first chapter because what you posted first was like the
The
second part of the second
outline.
chapter or something. Well, yeah, there was the outline. I've not read the outline. I read a bit of whatever was the first like sort of here's a draft. And I do recommend that folks check that out. I'll provide a link in the show notes because it is. I had a moment when I saw you doing that, and I thought, or I saw that you had the Patreon, and I thought I want to patronize some books. I want to be like an old school. I want to be like an old lord and choose some books to help make happen because I feel the lack of patronage in our current moment, and I would love to see it come back as a practice to just
Well, you know,
pay for some stuff
thanks
to
for your
happen.
support.
Sure.
No, I appreciate it. I
Yeah.
do.
But no, yeah. So I don't know. I kind of want to give you that as the last word. I really feel like that is I could talk about that forever. There's a lot of things that I feel about that, but you've put it better than I can. So I kind of want to leave it at that. Well, thank you for being on the show. Thank you for taking the time.
All right. Yeah, thanks for having me on, patron sir. Uh,
Of course. Um, when we end the show, and I always offer people an opportunity to suggest something better because this is a stupid way of ending the show. But traditionally, we end the show by thanking my cat Tony, one of my three cats. It's not clear what he's contributing to the process, but we do thank him. So unless you have a better idea, we can end by saying thank you, Tony.
Well, you saw my own cat
Yes,
actually appeared on camera, which is a step up from Tony.
your cat
Uh,
did contribute. Mine did not. What's your
yeah,
cat's
that's
name?
right. Up. That was Up who was
Up.
prancing around for a minute there. So thank you, Up, for being a blob.
Thank you, Up.
Library pizza. Pizza. Library pizza. Pizza.